The storm had swallowed the prairie whole. Snow came in sheets, relentless, white upon white until the fences disappeared and the lantern light at the Harper Ranch swam like a drowned star. Lisa staggered into the yard, shawl half torn from her shoulders, two swaddled bundles pressed against her chest. The babies whimpered against her skin, their breath shallow, their cries muffled by the cloth. Her lips cracked from cold, her cheeks still swollen where Ezekiel's hand had struck her. She moved as if each step bled from her bones. The world told her to stay, to curl into the hay and let the storm bury her. But the infant stirred, and the sound was a chord her heart could not silence. She tightened her arms. They were only hours old, fragile daughters, small as birds, already condemned by the man who called himself their father. Two girls, Ezekiel had spat, pacing the kitchen floor as the wind howled outside. His boots left streaks of mud on the plank boards. Worthless mouths. God's curse. You shame me, Lisa. He had torn the cradle to splinters before her eyes. His fury was colder than the snow, sharper than the wind that slipped through the walls. Then came his hand across her face, the command that she carry the girls into the night and rid him of their burden. He had not cared whether wolves or frost claimed them. She had begged, trembling, blood still drying at her thighs. Please, Ezekiel. They are yours too. Not mine, he hissed. No son, no heir. Just dead weight. And so she found herself stumbling across the yard, her boots breaking crusts of snow, her body burning with fever. Above her the sky bent low, gray with storm, while the barn rose like a shadow of sanctuary. She pressed her shoulder against its heavy door, pushed, and slipped inside. The smell of hay, damp leather, and horse musk filled her lungs. The horses whickered softly, breath steaming in the dark. She collapsed against a pile of straw, her back to the wall, clutching her daughters so tightly their cries softened into silence. Her tears streaked down her frozen cheeks, hot only for a moment before the cold claimed them. "Forgive me," she whispered, rocking them. Mama tried. Time staggered. Her pulse slowed. She thought of her mother's voice long ago, telling her that a woman's worth was measured in the son she bore. Shame carved itself into her ribs with each memory. She had carried it like a stone all her life, and now, bruised and abandoned, she believed it might be her grave. Snow pressed against the barn walls, and the wind whistled through the cracks. She let her head fall back, the darkness softening her eyes. Perhaps this was the only mercy left. The twins shifted against her, tiny fists curling, their warmth the last ember in a world of ice. A sound stirred. Not the horses, not the storm. A hush, heavy, deliberate like breath drawn deep and held. She blinked, vision blurring. The door groaned open against the wind, spilling a shaft of pale light across the straw. A figure filled the threshold. Broad-shouldered, bare to the storm, his skin bronzed and scarred by 1,000 battles. Snow clung to the long black strands of his hair, melting against the heat that seemed to rise from him. His eyes, dark, steady, fell on her and the bundles in her arms. Lisa froze, clutching the babies tighter, fear quickening her breath. She had heard the town whispers of Apaches who haunted these hills, warriors fierce and untamed. And here he stood, a giant in the snow, shirtless, unflinching, carved like a statue from some older world. Her lips trembled. She wanted to beg, to explain, but the words tangled in her throat. Shame smothered even her terror. What would he see but a broken woman, beaten and discarded, clutching two daughters the world did not want? But he did not move closer. He did not raise his hands or speak. He simply stood, snow swirling around him, gaze steady as if measuring her breath. In his stillness, there was no judgment, only a silence that pressed heavier than the storm itself. The horses shifted uneasily, hooves striking the dirt, yet quieted when his eyes turned toward them. The barn seemed to bow to his presence, as though the earth itself recognized a man who had endured more winters than it could count. Lisa swallowed, her voice raw. "If you mean to take us, then take us quickly." The stranger did not reply. Instead, he stepped inside, closing the door with a firm motion. The storm's howl dulled to a murmur. He knelt by the fire pit near the hayloft, struck flint to steel, and coaxed a flame into being. The glow spread, painting his chest with gold, illuminating the hard planes of his face. Lisa's breath caught. Her daughters stirred, turning toward the warmth. For the first time since the birth, she felt their bodies soften, their cries ebb. She stared at him, unsure whether to fear or trust, yet unable to deny the relief flooding her veins. A stranger had done what her husband would not, kindled fire, offered shelter, without demand or word. The man looked at her then, not at her bruises, not at her tears, but the tiny faces swaddled in her arms. His eyes softened, not a smile, not pity, but something quieter, older, like reverence. He reached out, slow, palm open. Lisa flinched, but he did not touch. He let the flame's warmth fill the space between them. Her daughters whimpered, fists twitching, and the stranger lowered his hand to the straw, steady and patient, as though waiting for her choice. Lisa closed her eyes. Her shame pressed hard, yet within it, something loosened, the smallest thread of defiance. She shifted one bundle, letting the newborn's cheek catch the firelight. The man's gaze deepened. Snow hissed against the barn roof. For a heartbeat, the storm outside seemed to vanish, and only the quiet between them remained. Lisa drew in a trembling breath, uncertain, afraid, yet unable to deny the strange sense that the night had shifted. Where she had expected death, she found fire. Where she had expected judgment, she found silence. And in the silence, something she had never known. The promise that her daughters were not burdens to be cast aside, but lives worth holding proud. The man's shadow stretched across the straw, falling over her and the children. His voice, when it came at last, was low and steady, a river beneath the ice. They will not die here. And then the fire crackled. The storm rattled the barn door, and Lisa realized the night was no longer hers alone. The fire grew, its glow licking across the barn walls, drawing shadows that swayed like specters. Lisa cradled her daughters closer, her breath catching each time the stranger shifted near the flames. He had not pressed her with questions, nor demanded thanks. He had simply brought warmth into a night that had promised only death. That silence unsettled her as much as it steadied her. The newborns stirred, whimpering from hunger, their cries thin but insistent. Lisa winced, rocking them with trembling arms. Her body, still tender from the birth, throbbed with exhaustion. Ezekiel had stormed off hours before, cursing the night and the burden she'd become. He had not looked back. She wondered if he even knew she still breathed. The stranger moved. His steps were slow, measured, as if he knew the horses would startle at sudden motion. He took a pail, broke ice from the trough outside, and returned with water steaming faintly from the nearness of the fire. He placed it within her reach, but did not hand it to her directly, as though mindful of her fear. Her lips parted, throat raw. Why are you here?" He did not answer at once. His gaze remained on the flames, his face carved by its shifting gold. At last he spoke, voice low and even, each word placed with care. "The storm led me." She stared at him. His chest, bare despite the snow clinging to his hair, seemed a thing untouched by cold. His shoulders bore the scars of blades and bullets, yet his manner held no threat. He did not look at her with hunger or disdain, only with a quiet watchfulness that unsettled her more than cruelty might have. Her daughters fussed, their cries rising sharper. Lisa's heart twisted. She had no milk left. Her body had given too much. Shame burned her throat. She could not meet his eyes, fearing what he might think of a mother too weak to feed her own. But he moved again, crossing to the corner where a goat lay tethered, restless in the straw. He crouched, whispering in a tongue she did not know, calming the creature with a steady hand. With practiced motions, he drew milk into a small tin. He warmed it by the fire, testing it against his wrist before offering it, still silent, toward her. Tears pricked her eyes. Her fingers shook as she guided the tin to her daughter's lips. The child latched greedily, the sound of suckling breaking the stillness. Lisa choked back a sob, pressing her cheek against the baby's soft crown. When she dared look up, the stranger's gaze was on her, not with triumph, not with pity, but with something steadier. Respect. Her voice cracked. You shame me with your kindness. His brow furrowed. He did not seem to understand. I cannot give them what they need, she whispered. And you provide it without a word. He tilted his head slightly, as though her sorrow puzzled him. A child is not shame, he said at last. They are life. The words struck her harder than Ezekiel's blows. She lowered her eyes, clutching both daughters as though to shield them from her own despair. For so long she had been told otherwise, that her worth lay in sons, that daughters were burdens. His voice, quiet and steady, cut through years of that belief like a blade through rope. The barn filled with softer sounds, the babies drinking, the crackle of fire, the steady rhythm of the man's breathing. Snow pressed against the walls, but inside the storm seemed far away. She watched him in secret, the way he moved without waste, how his hands, so large they could crush bone, handled even the frail tin with care. The way his silence was not emptiness, but a kind of reverence. He built no barrier of words, yet in his presence, she felt something she had forgotten: safety. Still, fear lingered. What would the town say if they knew an Apache had stepped across her threshold, held her daughters in his gaze? Abigail Crowley's sharp tongue would slice her reputation to shreds. The sheriff would call it scandal, maybe even betrayal. She could see it already, the whispers, the sideways glances, the laughter behind hands. Her shame rose again, coiling like smoke. She shifted, pulling her shawl tighter, as though hiding her bruises might also hide her heart. They will never forgive me, she murmured. The stranger's eyes flicked toward her. Forgive you. For surviving, she said bitterly. For being weak. For birthing girls instead of sons. For letting you stand here now. He studied her for a long moment, the firelight catching the scar that ran along his collarbone. His voice, when it came, was soft but unyielding. The storm does not ask forgiveness for falling. Neither should you for giving life. She swallowed hard, unable to answer. The babies slept at last, curled in the crook of her arm. Her body sagged with weariness, but she dared not close her eyes. Yet, as the fire warmed her, the stranger's presence kept the shadows at bay. She drifted in and out of half-dreams, each time waking to find him still there, still watchful. Once, she woke to see him carving something from a scrap of wood, his knife flashing in the firelight. The horses dozed. The goats shifted. The storm outside raged on. He worked without hurry, shaping lines into the grain. When he noticed her watching, he turned the carving toward her, a cradle, small enough to fit in his palm, etched with symbols she did not know. Her throat tightened. She could not speak. He placed it on the straw between them. Neither gift nor burden, only a thing that existed now, because he had chosen to create rather than destroy. The night stretched on. Snow piled against the walls. And still he remained, a silent sentinel. Lisa thought of Ezekiel then, his rage, his hatred of weakness, his boots on the floorboards as he stormed away. The thought chilled her more than the wind. She knew he would return, and when he did, he would see not only daughters he despised, but a stranger in their home. His fury would blaze hotter than any fire. She drew her shawl close, heart pounding, torn between dread and the faint ember of something else. Hope, fragile and uncertain, yet alive where before there had been only despair. Her gaze found the man again, his eyes on the sleeping children, his expression unreadable. Outside, the storm quieted, the world holding its breath. Inside, Lisa realized the true danger was not the cold, but the morning that would come. And when it came, she knew Ezekiel would bring with it a reckoning neither fire nor silence could keep at bay. By morning, the storm had quieted to a brittle stillness, the kind that left the world coated in glass. Frost clung to every branch, every fence post, every nail in the Harper ranch. Smoke curled from a chimney, though Ezekiel was nowhere to be seen. Inside the barn, Lisa stirred from uneasy sleep, her daughters safe against her chest, the fire embers still glowing faintly. The stranger had not left. He crouched near the doorway, his back to her, as if keeping watch against an enemy only he could sense. When sunlight split the clouds, painting the snow in pale gold, Lisa's heart tightened. Lightman eyes, eyes from the town, eyes from neighbors, eyes sharp as blades. She knew word would travel fast, swifter than the thaw of a spring creek. Abigail Crowley's tongue was sharper than any sheriff's badge, and by dusk, all of Willow Creek would know Lisa Harper had sheltered with an Apache warrior in her barn. She dared a whisper, "They will speak ill of me." The stranger did not turn. Let them. The simplicity of his reply struck her more than comfort. He spoke as though the judgment of others were no heavier than a passing gust of wind. Yet for her, it had always been a weight too great to bear. By midday, she wrapped her shawl tighter and carried the twins into town for bread. The stranger followed a few paces behind, silent, his presence towering. Every step on the frozen road felt like walking into a noose. At the general store, voices hushed as she entered. Men leaned on barrels of grain. Women paused in their measuring of fabric. Abigail Crowley, wrapped in a thick wool cloak, let her eyes slide over Lisa with the smoothness of a knife finding skin. "Well," Abigail murmured, loud enough for all to hear, "look at her. Not a day after birthing, and she parades herself with that savage." A titter of laughter rippled, though most eyes darted away. Lisa's cheeks burned. She kept her gaze low, focusing on her daughters, who shifted in her arms. Her hands trembled as she asked the shopkeeper for bread, her voice thin as smoke. Behind her, the stranger stood immovable, his gaze steady on the room. He did not bristle, did not flinch, but his silence was louder than any curse. One by one, eyes fell away from him, though Abigail's stare lingered, sharp and accusing. Outside, Lisa's steps faltered. "They will never let me live this down," she whispered. The stranger regarded her with a stillness that was almost sorrow. "You walk for your daughters, not for them." His words echoed within her chest, fighting the poison of years spent bending beneath shame. Still, fear knotted tight. She thought of Ezekiel's return, of how his fury would swell with each whisper he heard. That evening, Sheriff Dalton Reeves arrived at the ranch. He dismounted stiffly, his badge catching the pale light. He was a man who had lived long enough to know truth from rumor. Yet even he squinted at the sight of the stranger standing by the barn, shirtless despite the lingering cold. "Lisa," the sheriff said, his tone both weary and stern, "folks are talking. They say you've taken shelter with an Apache. Say he's sleeping under your roof." Lisa's lips trembled. "He saved my daughters in the storm. Without him, they'd be gone." The sheriff's gaze softened, but not enough to quiet the judgment woven into his duty. "That may be, but this town don't take kindly to mixing. You know the whispers will only grow louder." Her eyes stung, tears threatening. She glanced toward the barn, where the stranger stood watching, his presence unshaken. The sheriff followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. "You be wise to send him on his way." Her heart cracked. She wanted to cry out that it was not wisdom, but cowardice the town asked of her, that they demanded she send away the only man who had shown her daughter's tenderness. But the sheriff was already mounting his horse, leaving her in the churn of her own silence. That night, she sat by the fire in the house, her daughters asleep in their cradle. The stranger entered quietly, carrying the small wooden carving he had shaped. He placed it beside the cradle. In its lines, etched with care, she saw not shame but strength. She touched it with trembling fingers. "They will hate me for this," she said, her voice breaking. He met her eyes at last, and in the depths of his gaze she saw no pity, no condemnation, only truth. Hate is theirs to carry, not yours. Her breath shuddered. She looked at her daughters, so small, so innocent, and wondered what kind of women they might become if raised not in shame but in pride. For the first time, she dared to imagine a life not defined by Ezekiel's hand or the town's scorn. But as the fire crackled and shadows lengthened, the sound of boots crunched outside. Heavy, uneven, filled with anger. The door slammed open, wind gusting snow into the room. Ezekiel stood there, his eyes bloodshot, his coat hanging loose, whiskey sharp on his breath. His gaze fell on Lisa, then the cradle, then the stranger who rose slowly to his full height. Fury blazed across his face, twisted and wild. "You," he spat, voice ragged. "You dare stand in my house, hold my brats like they're worth a damn?" Lisa clutched the cradle, her heart hammering, fear and defiance clashing inside her like storm against mountain. The stranger's shoulders squared, silent as ever, his shadow stretching long against the wall. Ezekiel's hand dropped to the pistol at his hip. The air in the room froze, breathless. Lisa felt the world narrow to the point of that gun, the beat of her daughter's fragile hearts, the silence of the man who had saved them. And in that silence, she understood judgment was no longer the town's alone. It had come home, heavy as iron, with the smell of whiskey and gunpowder riding on its back. Ezekiel's pistol gleamed in the firelight, the barrel trembling as his hand fought with rage and whiskey. His breath came in harsh grunts, white steam clouding the cold air that blew in from the open door. Lisa stood frozen, her daughters asleep in the cradle beside her, the stranger's shadow looming large between her and the man she once called husband. "You dare!" Ezekiel snarled, voice breaking. "My own wife, my blood, shamed before the whole town with this savage standing in my place." Lisa's lips parted, but no words came. The years of silence, of bowing her head beneath his fury, clamped her throat shut. Yet the stranger, Gray Wolf, though she did not yet know his name, remained still as stone, his gaze fixed steady on Ezekiel, his broad chest rising calm against the storm. Ezekiel's eyes darted to the cradle. His voice dropped into a growl. "Those girls are a curse. You should have drowned them when I told you. Now you mock me, keeping them alive, parading them like they're worth something." Lisa felt her knees weaken, but her arms moved before thought could stop them. She stepped between the cradle and Ezekiel's gun, her body a trembling shield. The gesture was small, but in it she felt a thread snap inside her, the one that had kept her bowed all these years. "Don't," she whispered. The single word filled the room more loudly than any cry. Ezekiel's face twisted, half in shock, half in rage. He raised his hand, not the one with the gun, but the other, ready to strike. For a moment Lisa flinched, old habits dragging her head down. But then she stilled. She lifted her chin, though her cheeks still bore the bruise of his last blow. Gray Wolf stepped forward, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He did not reach for Ezekiel. He did not need to. His presence was enough to bend the air, to remind Ezekiel that his violence was no longer unchallenged. "You think you can stop me?" Ezekiel barked, spit flying. "This is my land, my house, my woman." Gray Wolf's eyes narrowed, unblinking. His voice rumbled low, like thunder before lightning. "No man owns life." The words struck like a stone against glass. Lisa's breath shuddered. She saw Ezekiel falter, just for a heartbeat, then surge again with blind rage. He shoved past the stranger and seized Lisa's arm. His grip was iron, biting into her skin. "You will learn," he hissed. "You'll learn your place, or I'll teach it with fire." Pain lanced through her, but she did not cry out. Instead, she met his eyes for the first time in years, her voice trembling yet fierce. "My place is with them, with my daughters." The silence that followed was deeper than the storm. Even the fire seemed to pause its crackle. Ezekiel's face twisted, red with fury. He shoved her backward, and she stumbled against the cradle. One of the girls stirred, her tiny cry piercing the air like a blade. Lisa's heart broke with the sound, and in that moment she knew. She could no longer bend, no longer beg. If she did, the cries of her daughters would be silenced forever. The townsfolk gathered outside, drawn by the shouting. Their shadows flickered against the snow as lanterns swayed. Sheriff Dalton stood among them, his jaw clenched, but his boots stayed planted. None entered. None interfered. Lisa felt their eyes pressing through the walls, waiting to see whether she would bow or break. Her shame rose hot, but this time it did not crush her. It fueled her. She straightened, cradling the child against her chest, her voice steady even as Ezekiel raised his pistol. "They are mine," she said, louder now, "and I will not be ashamed." The words rang like a bell, carrying past the walls into the night. A murmur ran through the crowd outside. Abigail Crowley gasped audibly, scandal and disbelief colliding. Yet no one moved. Ezekiel's finger tightened on the trigger. For a breath, Lisa thought the world would end in thunder and smoke. But Grey Wolf moved, not swift, not wild, but certain. His hand clamped Ezekiel's wrist, forcing the barrel upward. The gun fired into the rafters, a deafening crack that showered splinters down. The horses screamed, stamping in their stalls. Ezekiel cursed, struggling, but Grey Wolf's grip was unbreakable. He twisted, forcing the pistol from Ezekiel's hand, and flung it into the fire. Flames roared, swallowing the weapon whole. Ezekiel staggered back, his face pale beneath the fury. "You think you're safe with him?" Ezekiel spat, glaring at Lisa. "You think he can protect you from me? From all of them?" He jerked his head toward the windows, toward the waiting eyes of the town. "They'll turn on you. They'll call you ruined. And when they do, I'll be the one they believe." Lisa's heart thudded, each beat a drum against her ribs. She looked past Ezekiel, past the crowd, past the years of shame. For the first time, she felt the truth settle into her bones. Dignity was not theirs to grant, and shame was no longer hers to carry. She drew her daughters close, her voice clear, unyielding. "I will not bow to you. Not again." The crowd outside shifted, whispers rising like the rustle of dry leaves. Sheriff Dalton's hand moved to his gun, though he did not yet draw. Abigail clutched her shawl tight, her face pale in the lantern glow. Ezekiel's chest heaved. His eyes darted from Lisa to Grey Wolf, from the cradle to the fire. He looked like a man cornered, but not broken. His rage found a new edge. "Then hear me, all of you," he shouted, thrusting his arms wide toward the onlookers. "By dawn, I'll end this farce. I'll burn this house, these girls, and anyone who stands in my way." The words hung in the air, heavy as iron, carried by the wind to every ear in town. Gasps rang out. A child cried. The sheriff barked his name, but Ezekiel stormed into the snow, his boots crunching, his shadow swallowed by the night. Lisa stood trembling, her daughters pressed tight, the stranger beside her, his presence unshaken. The fire hissed, sparks spiraling upward where the pistol had vanished. Outside, the crowd began to scatter, murmurs trailing into the darkness. But inside, silence held, broken only by the steady breaths of her children. Lisa closed her eyes, her heart torn between terror and the faintest spark of resolve. Ezekiel's promise echoed like thunder. By dawn, the reckoning would come. And when it did, she knew the storm inside her walls would be fiercer than any that had fallen from the sky. The night settled heavy over the valley, darker than ink, quieter than breath. The snowfall returned with a vengeance, sweeping across the prairie in furious sheets, driving against the Harper Ranch until the timbers moaned and the shutters rattled. Inside the cabin, Lisa sat on the floorboards, her back against the wall, her daughters swaddled close, listening to the storm's fury and to the silence of the man who stood guard by the door. His presence filled the room as surely as the fire's glow, steady, immovable, as if the blizzard itself bent around him. She should have been trembling, crushed beneath the weight of Ezekiel's vow. But something inside her had shifted. For years, she had carried shame like a brand pressed deep into her flesh. Tonight, for the first time, she had spoken against it, claimed her daughters as hers with no apology. Terror still clutched her heart. Yes, but alongside it lived a strange and fragile flame. Resolve, fragile as new fire, yet stubborn against the wind. Grey Wolf moved little, his eyes fixed on the storm-swept dark beyond the window. His silence was not absence, but strength, and in it Lisa found a kind of anchor. She wondered what drove him. What history of storms and betrayals had shaped a man who could stand shirtless in the cold without flinching? She wanted to ask, to pull words from him like water from a hidden spring, yet she dared not. Some truths were not given, but revealed in time. The twins stirred, their cries soft but insistent. She hushed them gently, rocking them in the cradle he had carved. Even that act, the cradle born of his hands, felt like defiance against the cruelty of her husband. The symbols etched into the wood seemed to whisper of strength, of life, of belonging. She pressed her palm to them, drawing steadiness from the lines. The storm thickened, wind shrieking through the chinks in the walls. And then, faint at first but growing clearer, came the crunch of boots on snow. Lisa's breath caught. Gray Wolf turned his head, every muscle tightening without haste, his hand resting near the knife at his side. The door slammed open, wind and snow swirling inside. Ezekiel staggered across the threshold, his coat flapping, his hair matted with frost. In his hands burned the gleam of an axe, heavy, crude, raised high. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, the whiskey still in his veins. "You thought you could shame me," he snarled, voice breaking beneath the storm. "Thought you could defy me before the town, before God himself. I told you, woman, I'll see this house burn, see those girls gone, see you crawling on your knees before me again." Lisa rose, clutching the cradle, her body trembling yet firm. "You will not touch them." Her voice surprised even herself. It was not shrill, not broken, but clear. The words rang through the cabin, louder than the wind, louder than his fury. Ezekiel's face twisted with rage. He swung the axe down toward the cradle, but Gray Wolf moved. He crossed the room in a heartbeat, his hand catching the wooden haft before the blade could fall. The force of the blow shuddered through the floor, splinters flying, but Gray Wolf stood unyielding, his arm locked like iron. For a moment the two men strained, muscles taut, the storm screaming behind them. Ezekiel grunted, cursing, but the Apache did not speak. He wrenched the axe free with a single motion and flung it across the room. It buried itself in the far wall, quivering. Ezekiel lunged, fists flying. Gray Wolf took the blows in silence, his face turning but not breaking. Then, with a sudden shift, he caught Ezekiel's arm, twisted, and sent him sprawling across the floor. The man crashed against the table, dishes shattering, firelight scattering over his contorted face. The twins wailed, their cries sharp as knives. Lisa scooped them close, her body curling around them. She wanted to shut her eyes, to close out the violence, but she forced herself to watch. She would not look away anymore. Ezekiel staggered up, blood streaking from his lip. His eyes darted to the pistol Gray Wolf had thrown into the fire earlier, now half-melted, useless. Rage boiled higher. He reached for the knife at his boot, drawing it with a snarl. Gray Wolf did not retreat. He stepped forward, calm as stone, his knife flashing into his hand, its blade catching the firelight. The two men circled, breath harsh, the storm outside hammering its fists against the walls. Savage, Ezekiel spat. "You think she'll choose you? She's mine. Always mine." Gray Wolf's eyes flicked to Lisa, then back to Ezekiel. His voice came low, steady. "No one owns her. No one owns them." The word struck like a bell. Lisa's chest tightened, tears burning her eyes, but she stood taller. She pressed a kiss to her daughter's foreheads, as though sealing his words into their flesh. Ezekiel roared and charged. The knives met with a crack of steel, sparks flying. The men grappled, boots scraping, breath ragged. Gray Wolf's strength was immense, his movement sure, honed by years of battles Lisa could not imagine. Ezekiel fought with desperation, a man who knew he was already defeated yet would burn the world to drag it down with him. The struggle crashed into the hearth, embers scattering across the floor. Lisa cried out, rushing to stamp them before the flames spread. Behind her, the clash raged, grunts, curses, the scrape of metal. Then, with one swift motion, Gray Wolf disarmed him, sending the knife spinning across the floor. He held Ezekiel pinned, his blade poised at the man's throat. Silence fell, broken only by the storm and Ezekiel's ragged breaths. His eyes bulged with fear, yet still he spat, froth at his lips. "Kill me, then. Show her what you are. Show them all." Gray Wolf did not move. His chest heaved, his gaze steady. Slowly, He lowered the blade. Instead of death, he offered Ezekiel the weight of his own survival, the shame of his defeat. He stepped back, letting the man crumple onto the floor like refuse. Sheriff Dalton appeared in the doorway then, lantern in hand, snow dusting his hat. Behind him, townsfolk gathered, their faces pale, eyes wide. They had heard the shouts, the clash of steel, the cries. They had come to witness, though none had dared to step in. The sheriff's gaze swept the room. The cradle, the shattered dishes, Ezekiel trembling on the floor, Gray Wolf standing tall, unshaken. Then his eyes found Lisa. Her breath steadied. Her arms held her daughters close, their cries easing into whimpers. She felt the eyes of the town upon her, felt their judgment, their hunger for scandal. But something in her no longer cared. Shame had no claim on her anymore. She lifted her chin, her voice quiet but clear. He swore he would kill us. He nearly did, but we are still here. The sheriff's face softened, the weight of truth undeniable. Slowly, he stepped forward and seized Ezekiel by the arm, hauling him upright. The man fought weakly, cursing, but his strength had bled out with the fight. Dalton's voice carried firm. "Ezekiel Harper, you'll answer for this. The law will hear it plain." The townsfolk murmured, whispers swirling like snowdrifts. Abigail Crowley's lips pressed tight, her eyes darting between Lisa and the cradle. Yet none spoke against her. The silence was heavy, but it was not condemnation. It was the silence of people who had witnessed something they could no longer deny. As the sheriff dragged Ezekiel into the night, the storm began to ease. The snow fell softer, gentler, as though the earth itself exhaled. Lisa sank to her knees, her daughters cradled close, tears spilling freely. But these tears were not of shame. They were of release. Gray Wolf sheathed his knife, then crouched beside her. He did not touch her, did not speak, but his eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. In them she saw not rescue, not possession, but a promise that whatever road lay ahead, she need not walk it alone. She reached for the carved cradle, running her fingers over the etched lines. Her daughters stirred, their tiny fists flexing, their eyes opening to the firelight. She kissed them softly, whispering against their skin, "You are mine, and you'll be proud." The fire crackled, the storm hushed, the world pausing in fragile peace. Lisa felt the weight of years lifting, replaced by something new, dignity born not of approval, but of her refusal to bow. Later, when the townsfolk spoke of that night, their words carried judgment, suspicion, fear. But beneath it all lay something else, respect. They had seen a woman stand, bruised yet unbroken, shield her daughters with her body, claim her life with her voice. No whisper could take that from her. And if you listen close, even now, across the years, you can hear the truth echoing through the storm. The world may brand you with shame, may press its weight until you bend. But dignity is born in the moment you refuse to carry it any longer. Remember this, you who walk your own winter roads, that even in the cruelest storm, a flame can be kept alive if only you dare to shield it with your life.